Evangelistic preaching. That sounds somewhat like a Captain Obvious type of title. I mean, isn't all preaching really intended to be evangelistic? Of course it is, but the truth is, sometimes when it comes to evangelistic preaching, we kind of narrow that understanding to simply an outreach event or some kind of special occasion where we're going to emphasize the gospel in a particular way by preaching a more of an evangelistic text. But evangelistic preaching is not simply reserved for special occasions. In fact, it ought to mark all of our preaching. It's not really Christian preaching unless it's a gospel message that includes the gospel and an evangelistic opportunity for response. In fact, when you think about Paul and how he kind of viewed preaching, he said in 1 Corinthians 9:16, "Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." And we know that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation for all people. So all of our preaching ought to be marked by this evangelistic thrust. And that's going to be seen and ultimately accomplished when we kind of infuse all of our preaching with the gospel. So how do we do that in an effective way so that all of our preaching becomes evangelistic? First, we want to remember, preach the gospel faithfully. Preach the gospel faithfully. How do you do that? It starts by simply being faithful to the biblical text. If we're faithful to preach God's word, which we know is living and active, and that God will use kind of as a sword and a scalpel to penetrate to the depths of thoughts and intentions of the heart, judging those things and bringing about new life. If we know that the biblical text is going to accomplish that, then we can simply devote ourselves to preaching God's word and allowing it to do the work. Because Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:15, it's through the sacred scriptures that you're able to receive salvation in Christ Jesus. And we know that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So when we're faithful to the biblical text, we actually give God the best opportunity, if you will, for his spirit to work in the hearts of an unbeliever to bring them to faith in Christ through the truth, the saving truth of his word. Practically speaking, this means that we shouldn't focus on preaching topical messages as much as we should preach textual messages. Even if it's a short passage, even if it's a single verse, let the text speak. So when we preach the gospel message from the text, we're also not just going to be faithful to the biblical text. We're going to be faithful to the gospel truth. Within every passage of Scripture, there is a redemptive truth or theme that we're called to bring out. So whether that's in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, if that's a narrative, if that's an epistle, we're going to kind of follow the model of Christ when he was on the Emmaus Road and he was kind of interpreting all the Scriptures to demonstrate to those disciples that they all pointed to him. Jesus is the ultimate hero. There's what Brian Chappell calls the fallen condition focus in a passage. It's going to demonstrate kind of the humanity's problem, what areas point to our sinfulness and our need for a Savior. And through that, we can also recognize Jesus as the goal of that Scripture and how that salvation is fulfilled in his work on the cross and his death, burial, and ultimately resurrection. So if we're going to kind of have evangelistic preaching, it's going to begin by us being faithful to preach the text and also being faithful to the gospel truth. So don't just begin by preaching the gospel faithfully. Let's also be intentional to present the gospel clearly. Right? So as we preach the biblical text, we've got to present the gospel clearly. Oftentimes we can kind of get distracted by trying to be clever, but it's always more important to be clear than it is clever. So what does that include? Well, we need to help people understand very clearly, succinctly, what is the reality of the gospel. In 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 and 4, Paul kind of summarizes that in that succinct way. He talks about there that he delivered to them that which is of the utmost importance. And what he described there was that Christ died according to the Scriptures, that he was buried and rose again according to the Scriptures. So from the Scriptures, we're going to present the gospel with clarity. As that kind of unfolds for us, maybe you can think of it as emphasizing really kind of three kernel truths to the gospel. One is the holiness of God, right? Then you have, by contrast, the sinfulness of man. So God in his infinite perfection is holy and just and righteous. And we, in our sinfulness, deserve punishment and the retribution of a holy God. So there's the holiness of God, the sinfulness of man, but then that's met and brought together in the forgiveness that's available in Christ. So as we preach the gospel and how the cross reconciles us to God and redeems us from our sin, we can be clear with what the gospel is and how people should respond by just simply preaching the holiness of God, the sinfulness of man, and the forgiveness in Christ. But not only do we kind of explain the reality of the gospel, we must be clear with what the response to the gospel is. How do they respond? In simple truth, we have to explain to them, look, it's by grace through faith in Christ as you turn from your sin and trust in the Savior. That's the simple explanation of how to respond to the gospel. Too many times when we present the gospel, we talk about it kind of in ways that the Bible doesn't really define it as. So, for instance, we might define the gospel or the response to the gospel in destinational terms. We talk about, do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell? Sometimes we define it in situational terms. Kind of, I want God to fix a problem in my life. But the Bible doesn't describe the gospel or even eternal life in that way. In fact, what we're called to do is to define it in relational terms. Jesus said in John 17:3, right? This is eternal life, that you may know the one true and living God and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. So if we're going to kind of appeal to them and present the gospel clearly, we must help them know what God expects from them in terms of how to respond. That by God's grace, through faith, they can trust in what Christ has done. And by doing that, understanding that, they can respond and be saved. And through that, the byproducts of eternal life in heaven or God reconciling and redeeming the brokenness of our life happens. But those are byproducts of the ultimate truth of the gospel, which is salvation in Jesus himself. So if we're going to preach evangelistically, not only must we preach the gospel faithfully and present the gospel clearly, we should then proclaim the gospel earnestly. Proclaim the gospel earnestly. Too many times when we read in Acts, kind of the early church, the boldness that the apostles had, we kind of limit that to some sort of energy or excitement or enthusiasm or even bravery. But in reality, I believe that some of the boldness was a boldness to invite people to respond. And we have to be intentional to do this. We're inviting a response. We're not just kind of giving it out as like, well, you can do this. You don't have to do this. This may be an option for you. No, there's got to be a pleading, not with pressure, but a pleading for a decision. There's urgency there. We're not coercing them, but we're inviting them to respond to the gospel. In our hearts, we're trusting the Scripture and the Spirit to do the work of penetrating the darkness of their hearts. But we're inviting them to respond by faith as God awakens their hearts and the Spirit to the gospel. So invite them to respond. Don't neglect that evangelistic invitation, if you will. I'm not going to prescribe and wouldn't begin to kind of say that every context doesn't need to be considered with what an invitation looks like. But we can't not have some level of invitation to respond. So invite them to respond. And then in our messages, we must also instruct them to respond. Tell them what they should do, what it looks like. Be clear with the decision. What's the decision they're making? What are we asking them to do? How can they make that decision? And what steps are they to take? This is not something that's related to their works. It's simply inviting them to know this is what God is asking me to do. Whether that's leading them in something like the sinner's prayer, whether that's instructing them to come forward, whether that's guiding them to go to a place of decision that you've otherwise designated in your service as part of your church ministry there. Whatever it is, be clear with what you're inviting them to do and how you're instructing them to respond. So if we're going to preach evangelistically, if we're going to pray that God would bring us a harvest of souls for our labor in his kingdom, we must do so by preaching the gospel faithfully. We must do so by presenting the gospel clearly. And we should do so also by proclaiming the gospel earnestly. I pray that God will give you fruit for your labor. And I pray that God will continue to redeem all people and draw people to himself as you proclaim the gospel this way.